The dead should stay buried. That's what my supervisor told me the night Mrs. Cole stopped breathing at 2:17 a.m., but guilt doesn't follow rules, and neither do secrets. The cemetery was still dark when I stepped through the iron gates at 5:03 a.m., the sky barely gray, the air cold enough to sting my lungs. I told myself I just needed 5 minutes, 5 quiet minutes to say what I never got to say in that hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and fading hope. Her headstone was simple, white marble, polished, untouched by time except for the thin line of rainwater tracing down her name. Margaret Cole, beloved mother. I knelt in the damp grass, my jeans soaking through instantly, my fingers trembling as I placed the white lilies at the base. I tried. I whispered, pressing my palm against the stone as if it could still feel warmth. I swear I tried. The memory hit me the way it always did. Monitors humming softly, her pulse weakening under my fingertips, her voice barely more than air when she said, "Don't trust," and then stopped. I never heard the rest. They told me to step away, told me it was protocol, told me I was just a nurse. But I saw the way the medication was switched. I saw the look exchanged across the room. And I stayed quiet. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you," I breathed, the words catching in my throat. "I'm sorry I listened." Gravel shifted behind me. Soft. Measured. Not the sound of someone visiting a grave. The air changed before I even turned around. Save her from what? The voice was low, controlled, and close enough to make my heartbeat stumble. I looked up slowly and saw him standing 10 feet away, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black overcoat that fit like it had been cut just for him. Adrian Cole. I had seen his face once before, on a hospital donation plaque, on the news, whispered about in hallways. 6'3" of stillness and authority, pale blue eyes fixed on me like he was reading a language written across my skin. "You heard that?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. "Every word," he replied, stepping closer, his shoes silent against the gravel. He didn't look angry. He looked precise, calculating. My mother didn't die from something that needed saving. It wasn't a question. My pulse raced. I hadn't planned for this. I hadn't planned for him. "She tried to tell me something," I said, forcing the words out before fear could shut me down. "The night she passed. Someone didn't want her to finish." His jaw tightened just slightly. That was the only crack in the armor. "Careful," he said quietly. "That's a dangerous accusation." Headlights flashed at the far end of the cemetery, cutting through the fog. A black SUV rolled slowly past the gates. Adrian didn't turn to look at it. He kept his eyes on me. "Who told you to stay quiet?" he asked. The truth hovered between us, heavy and irreversible. I swallowed. "One of your executives," I said. "The man who signed the medication order." Silence stretched 3 long seconds. The wind lifted the edge of his coat. Somewhere behind us, a car door shut. Adrian stepped closer until the space between us felt charged. "You came here to apologize," he said, voice steady but colder now. "Now you're going to tell me everything." I should have lied. I should have said I was confused, that grief had twisted my memory into something dramatic and untrue. But the way Adrian Cole looked at me made lying feel pointless. His eyes did not flicker. They did not soften. They waited. The black SUV at the edge of the cemetery idled quietly, headlights dimming, as if whoever sat inside did not want to interrupt, but wanted to be close enough to hear if something changed. I drew in a breath that tasted like cold stone and wet grass. "The medication was switched at 1:52 in the morning," I said carefully. "I know because I charted the first dosage myself. When I came back from checking another patient, the vial was different. Same label, different batch number." Adrian did not move, but something sharpened in his posture, like a wire pulled tight. "And you are certain," he said, "that it was not a routine replacement?" "I am certain," I replied. "I asked about it. I was told to focus on my shift and stop asking questions." The memory crawled up my spine. The fluorescent lights. The hush in the room that felt staged. Mrs. Cole's hand gripping mine with surprising strength for someone so weak. "Do not trust," she had whispered. I never found out who she meant. "Who signed the order?" Adrian asked. His voice was calm, almost detached, but it carried weight. The kind of weight that made truth feel dangerous. I swallowed. "Daniel Reeves," I said. "Chief Operations Officer. He came in personally. He never visits patients." Everyone knew that. The name settled between us. The wind moved through the trees above, leaves whispering against one another like they were trading secrets. Adrian finally glanced toward the SUV. The driver's door opened slightly, then closed again. A silent signal. I suddenly understood that I was standing in the center of something much larger than my guilt. "You are aware," Adrian said slowly, "that Daniel Reeves has worked beside me for 9 years. "I am aware," I answered. "And I am aware that your mother looked afraid when she saw him." Saying it out loud made my pulse spike. Fear tried to rise, but something stronger pushed through. Relief. I had carried this alone for 6 months. The truth felt heavy, but it also felt clean. Adrian stepped closer until we were only a few feet apart. I could see the faint silver thread at his temple, the controlled rise and fall of his chest. "Why come here today?" he asked. "Why risk telling me now?" I looked back at the marble headstone. "Because I kept hearing her voice," I admitted. "And because I realized silence makes me part of it." The SUV engine cut off. The sudden quiet rang in my ears. Adrian studied my face for a long moment, like he was measuring whether regret could be fabricated. "If what you are saying is true," he said finally, "then you did not fail to save her." His gaze hardened. "You were prevented." The word sent a chill through me. Prevented meant intention. It meant planning. It meant someone believed Margaret Cole needed to be quiet forever. Adrian glanced toward the cemetery gates. "You understand that speaking to me puts you at risk," he said. "I have already been at risk," I replied softly. "I just did not know from who." A faint sound carried across the gravel. Another vehicle approaching the entrance. Adrian's eyes shifted, assessing, calculating. Then they returned to me. "You are coming with me," he said. It was not a threat. It was a decision. "If Daniel Reeves silenced my mother," Adrian continued, his voice lower now, colder, "then he will try to silence you." My heart hammered, but I nodded. For the first time since that night in the hospital, I did not feel alone with what I knew. I felt like I had stepped into something irreversible. And Adrian Cole was not looking at me like a stranger anymore. He was looking at me like a witness. The ride out of the cemetery felt unreal, like I had stepped off the edge of my old life and into something colder, sharper. I sat in the back seat of the black SUV, my hands folded in my lap to hide the tremor in my fingers. The leather smelled expensive and clean, nothing like the antiseptic air of the hospital where everything had gone wrong. Adrian sat beside me, close enough that I could feel the quiet gravity of him, but not touching. He had not looked at his phone once. He had not spoken Daniel Reeves's name again. He simply watched the road ahead as Manhattan slowly woke around us, streetlights blinking off one by one, early commuters stepping onto sidewalks with coffee cups and tired eyes. "Where are we going?" I asked finally, my voice steadier than I felt. "Somewhere private," Adrian replied. "Somewhere he does not control." The way he said he made my stomach tighten. Daniel Reeves had always seemed polished, measured, the kind of executive who shook hands firmly and donated to hospital wings. I had never imagined his name would sound like a threat. The SUV turned onto a quieter avenue lined with brownstones and bare trees. We stopped in front of a townhouse that looked ordinary from the outside. Brick facade, black iron railing, nothing that hinted at the power humming beneath it. Inside, everything was quiet. Warm lighting, clean lines. No photographs on the walls except one framed picture on a console table near the staircase. Margaret Cole, smiling at something outside the frame, her hair caught in the wind. My throat tightened. Adrian noticed. "She hated that picture," he said softly. "She said it made her look distracted." "She looked kind," I answered before I could stop myself. His eyes shifted to me, searching, measuring again. "Sit," he said, gesturing toward a long gray sofa. I lowered myself onto it carefully, feeling suddenly small in the wide, silent room. Adrian remained standing. "Tell me everything," he said. Not rushed, not impatient. Exact. I closed my eyes for a second and went back to that night. The clock on the wall reading 1:47 a.m. The way Daniel Reeves walked into the room without knocking. The nurse who avoided my gaze. "He asked me to step out," I said. "He said he wanted to discuss a donation plan with your mother." At 1 in the morning. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. When I came back, the dosage had changed. And she was weaker. The memory pressed against my chest like weight. She tried to say something to me. I leaned closer. She squeezed my hand and whispered those 2 words. "Do not trust." I thought she meant her diagnosis. I thought she was afraid of dying. I opened my eyes and met his. Now I think she was afraid of him. Silence settled between us, heavy but controlled. Adrian moved to the window, looking out at the quiet street, as if mapping something only he could see. Daniel has managed my external operations for nearly a decade, he said slowly. He oversees contracts, shipments, finances. His voice did not rise. It did not shake. That made it more unsettling. If he wanted something concealed, he would know how to do it without leaving fingerprints. I swallowed. I did not keep copies of the chart, I admitted. I was scared. Adrian turned back toward me. Fear is expected, he said. Loyalty is not. The words lingered. I realized then that he was not angry at me. He was recalculating everything around him. A soft vibration came from the table near the door. One of his men stepped inside, murmured something low and urgent. Adrian listened without interrupting, then nodded once. When the man left, Adrian looked at me with a new kind of intensity. Daniel Reeves is already asking about you, he said quietly. My pulse stumbled. How would he know? Adrian's gaze hardened just enough to send a chill through me. Because the moment you spoke at that grave, the war you did not know you were standing in began. The words settled into my chest like ice water. Daniel Reeves is already asking about you. I felt the room tilt, not physically, but internally, like the ground I trusted had shifted a few inches to the left. What exactly is he asking? I managed, forcing my voice to remain steady. Adrian did not answer immediately. He walked toward the console table and picked up the framed photograph of his mother, studying it for a brief second before setting it back down with careful precision. He called the hospital board this morning, Adrian said. He inquired about staffing changes, specifically about a nurse named Claire Bennett who was on duty the night my mother passed. My pulse quickened. I did not tell anyone I was coming to the cemetery. You did not need to, he replied. Men like Daniel prepare for possibilities. He likely monitored the anniversary. The realization pressed against my ribs. I had thought grief was private. I had thought apologies whispered at dawn could remain between the living and the dead. Does he know I spoke to you? I asked. Adrian's eyes met mine. Not yet. That yet carried weight. I folded my hands together, trying to still the tremor. I never accused him directly, I said. I only questioned the dosage. I never filed a report. Adrian stepped closer, his presence steady rather than threatening. Silence protects the powerful, he said quietly. But once broken, it exposes who fears the truth. A soft knock sounded at the door. The same man from earlier entered, his expression controlled but alert. There was a call placed from Reeves's office to a private investigator, he said. Within the last hour. He glanced briefly at me. The subject name was Claire Bennett. My throat went dry. Adrian dismissed him with a slight nod, then turned back to me. You have two choices, he said. You can return to your apartment and pretend none of this happened, and hope Daniel believes you are harmless. Or you can stay under my protection until I know exactly what he is planning. The word protection felt heavy. I had spent 6 months trying to avoid being noticed by anyone with influence. Now I was being offered safety by the one man who stood at the center of it all. If I stay, I asked, what does that make me? Adrian did not hesitate. It makes you a witness. The word echoed. Witness meant I mattered. Witness meant the truth had weight. He will not confront me directly, will he? I asked softly. Adrian's expression remained composed. Daniel prefers strategy over confrontation. He will attempt to discredit you first, question your record, suggest instability, create doubt. I let out a slow breath. That sounded worse than anger. That sounded deliberate. Then I stay, I said, surprising even myself with how quickly the answer came. Adrian studied me, as if confirming the resolve in my tone. Very well, he said. From this moment forward, you do not leave alone. You do not answer unknown calls. And you tell me if anything feels unusual. I nodded. The rules felt strict, but clear. Clear was better than confusion. Adrian moved toward the window again, looking out at the quiet street as sunlight crept higher between the buildings. If Daniel Reeves orchestrated my mother's silence, he said, his voice lower now, more personal, then he underestimated one thing. He turned his gaze back to me. He underestimated the person who refused to forget. For the first time since that night in the hospital, the guilt inside me shifted. It was still there, but it no longer felt like a solitary burden. It felt like a spark. And judging by the way Adrian Cole's eyes had hardened, sparks in his world did not fade quietly. Staying meant calling in sick. It meant watching my phone light up with 3 missed calls from the hospital within an hour and not answering a single one. I sat at the long kitchen island in Adrian's townhouse while one of his men set a sealed envelope in front of him. The paper looked ordinary. The tension in the room did not. Adrian opened it without comment. Inside was a printed copy of my employment file. My full name, my address, my nursing evaluations, my graduation date, even the student loan balance I had never told anyone about. My stomach dropped. He moves quickly, Adrian said, scanning the pages with calm precision. Too quickly for coincidence. I pressed my palms against the cool marble countertop. That file is confidential. Adrian gave me a look that was almost gentle, but not quite. Confidential is a suggestion to men like Daniel. The word suggestion lingered in the air. I had always believed rules were boundaries. Now I was beginning to understand that in Adrian's world, rules were tools. A soft vibration came from my phone. Unknown number. I stared at it, my pulse thudding in my ears. Adrian noticed. "Do not answer," he said quietly. The call went to voicemail. Seconds later, a text appeared. "We need to discuss your conduct on the night of Mrs. Cole's passing. Please return this call immediately." It was signed by the hospital director. I felt heat rise in my chest. "He is already rewriting the story," I whispered. Adrian folded the papers neatly and set them aside. "He wants you to panic," he said. "Panic makes people careless." I let out a slow breath. "I am not careless." Adrian's gaze met mine, steady and assessing. "No," he agreed. "You came to a cemetery at 5 in the morning instead of speaking publicly. That tells me you were cautious. That also tells me you were afraid." The honesty in his tone disarmed me. I admitted. "I am." The front door opened quietly and closed again. Another one of his men entered, speaking in a low voice. "Daniel Reeves has scheduled a press briefing tomorrow afternoon. Topic listed as strategic restructuring of healthcare partnerships." Adrian did not react outwardly, but I saw it in his eyes. "Calculation. He is going to get ahead of it," I said. "If he paints me as unstable or incompetent, no one will believe anything I say." Adrian stepped closer, not invading my space, but narrowing the distance just enough to anchor me. "Then we do not let him control the narrative," he said. "We gather proof." The word proof steadied something inside me. "The batch number," I said quickly. "If I can access the pharmacy logs, I can show the switch." Adrian considered this. "Can you get back into the hospital without raising suspicion?" I hesitated. "If I go during normal hours, no? But night shift security changes at 11:30. For 15 minutes, the access desk is unattended." His eyes sharpened slightly. "You have been paying attention." "I pay attention for a living," I replied. Silence stretched between us, not uncomfortable, but charged. Adrian nodded once. "Then tonight, we retrieve your proof." My heartbeat quickened, not from fear this time, but from purpose. For months, guilt had kept me small. Now it felt like fuel. Adrian picked up his mother's photograph from the console table and held it for a brief second before setting it back down. "If Daniel believes silence protects him," he said quietly, "he is about to learn that memory can be louder." And for the first time since I knelt in that cold grass at dawn, I felt something shift inside me that was not regret. It was resolve. Night settles differently when you are about to break your own rules. By 10:45, the city outside Adrian's townhouse had shifted into that quiet hum that only exists between business hours and midnight. I changed into the simplest clothes I owned: dark jeans, a gray sweater, sneakers that did not make sound on polished floors. Adrian stood near the door, jacket on, expression unreadable. "You stay beside me," he said. Not forceful. Certain. The drive to the hospital felt longer than it ever had before. I had walked those automatic doors hundreds of times with coffee in my hand and exhaustion in my bones. Tonight, I stepped out of a black SUV with tinted windows and a man whose presence bent space around him. The hospital facade looked the same. Glass reflecting streetlights. The flag near the entrance moving slightly in the cold air. Ordinary. That was what made it dangerous. "Security rotation changes in 5 minutes," I whispered as we entered through the side staff access. Adrian nodded once. He did not speak to anyone, but people moved when he walked. Not because they recognized him, because authority has a rhythm, and he carried it effortlessly. The hallway lights were dimmed for night mode, the floor freshly polished, the scent of disinfectant sharp and familiar. My pulse picked up as we reached the pharmacy wing. 11:28. I murmured, glancing at the clock above the nurse's station. A guard stood near the access desk, scrolling through his phone. At exactly 11:30, another guard approached from the opposite corridor. They exchanged a few quiet words and stepped away together toward the security office. 15 minutes. That was all we had. I swiped my badge. The light flashed green. We moved inside. The pharmacy storage room felt smaller than I remembered. Shelves lined with labeled bins. Locked cabinets. A computer terminal glowing softly in the corner. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for half a second before I typed in my credentials. Access granted. The words steadied me. Batch records. I said under my breath. Navigating to archived logs from 6 months ago. My heart thudded in my ears as the file opened. There it was. The original entry at 1:47 in the morning. Medication code matching the standard treatment. Then at 1:52, an override. Same medication name. Different batch. Number. Authorized by Daniel Reeves. I felt the air leave my lungs slowly. Take a photo, Adrian said quietly. I pulled out my phone and documented the screen carefully, making sure the timestamp was visible. My hands did not shake this time. They felt precise. Controlled. Download a copy, he added. I inserted a small flash drive from his coat pocket into the computer and transferred the file. The progress bar moved painfully slow, each second stretching longer than the last. Footsteps echoed faintly in the hallway outside. My pulse jumped. 2 minutes, Adrian said calmly, as if he could measure time by instinct alone. The transfer completed. I removed the drive and slipped it into my pocket. I logged out and closed the terminal exactly as I had found it. When we stepped back into the corridor, the lights seemed brighter. The world louder. The guards returned to their posts without noticing us. As we walked toward the exit, I glanced back once at the pharmacy door. 6 months ago, I had walked away from that room with doubt. Tonight, I walked away with proof. Outside, the cold air hit my face, sharp and clean. Adrian opened the car door for me, his expression steady but different now. Not just controlled. Certain. He wanted to question your memory, he said as the engine started. Now we question his. I pressed my hand against my coat pocket where the flash drive rested. For the first time since the monitors went silent at 2:17 in the morning, I felt like the truth had weighed in my hands. And weight, in the right place, can shift everything. Proof changes the air around you. I felt at the moment we stepped back into Adrian's townhouse just after midnight. The city outside quieter now, the streetlights casting long gold lines across the hardwood floors. I placed the flash drive on the kitchen island like it was something fragile, something alive. Adrian did not touch it immediately. He removed his coat slowly, deliberate, controlled, then looked at me as if confirming I was steady enough for what came next. You understand, he said, that once I confront him with this, there is no return to normal. I let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. There has not been normal for 6 months. He studied me for a second longer, then inserted the flash drive into his laptop. The screen reflected faintly in his pale blue eyes as the files loaded. Timestamps. Authorization codes. The override bearing Daniel Reeves's digital signature. Adrian did not react outwardly, but something in his posture shifted. A final piece clicking into place. He assumed no one would look twice at a batch number, Adrian said quietly. He underestimated the person who logged it. My phone vibrated again on the counter. This time it was not an unknown number. It was the hospital director's direct line. I stared at it. Adrian nodded once. Answer, he said. Put it on speaker. My pulse quickened as I accepted the call. Claire. The director's voice came through, tight and formal. We need to discuss your conduct and the concerns raised regarding your performance the night Mrs. Cole passed. I kept my tone calm. What concerns? A pause. Papers shifting. There are discrepancies in your charting. Adrian's gaze never left my face. I reached into my pocket and placed the printed screenshot we had made onto the counter in front of him. I would be happy to review the pharmacy logs, I said evenly. Silence on the other end. Then, that will not be necessary at this time. The line went dead. The quiet in the room felt heavier than before. Adrian closed the laptop slowly. He knows you have something, he said. I nodded. And he is afraid of what I might do with it. Adrian's expression did not soften, but there was something new there. Respect. Tomorrow afternoon he plans a press briefing, Adrian continued. He intends to restructure his alliances publicly. He will frame it as business strategy. I folded my arms, trying to steady the surge of adrenaline. Then we show up. Adrian tilted his head slightly. You would stand in that room? I met his eyes without hesitation. I stood in a hospital room and stayed silent. I am not doing that again. The words surprised even me with their certainty. Adrian walked toward the console table and picked up his mother's photograph once more. For a moment, he looked less like a man who controlled entire industries and more like a son who had been forced to question his own foundation. If Daniel chose betrayal, he said quietly, he chose it believing loyalty would protect him. He set the photograph down carefully. Tomorrow we remind him that loyalty can shift. Outside, a car slowed near the townhouse, then continued down the street. The world kept moving, unaware that lines had been crossed in silence. I pressed my hand against the flash drive in my pocket, feeling its solid edge through the fabric. 6 months ago, I thought guilt would bury me. Tonight, it felt like armor. And for the first time since that monitor went still at 2:17 in the morning, I did not feel like I was standing alone against something powerful. I felt like I was standing beside it, ready to see who blinked first. Morning arrived too quickly. I had not slept, only rested my eyes for minutes at a time on the leather couch in Adrian's living room while the sky outside shifted from black to steel gray. By 9:30, the townhouse was quiet but alert, like the air before a storm. Adrian stood near the window, already dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him with effortless precision. The television, mounted on the wall, played a local news channel on low volume. A banner scrolled across the bottom of the screen announcing a press briefing at 2 o'clock in the afternoon hosted by Daniel Reeves, Chief Operations Officer of Cole Strategic Holdings. My name was not mentioned. Not yet. He will present stability, Adrian said without turning. Confidence. He will speak about expansion and partnerships. He will not expect interruption. I stood beside the kitchen island, the flash drive resting in my palm, its edges pressing into my skin like a reminder. Then we give him one. Adrian finally looked at me. There was no hesitation in his expression, only calculation. You will not speak unless I signal, he said. Let him commit to his version first. I nodded. My reflection in the dark screen of the television looked unfamiliar, less uncertain, more resolved. At 1:45, we arrived at the corporate building downtown. Glass and steel stretched upward, reflecting the bright afternoon sun. The lobby buzzed with journalists, cameras, and quiet conversation. I felt eyes pass over me, curious but not yet aware. Adrian moved through the crowd without raising his voice, yet space opened around him instinctively. Authority did not require volume. It required presence. We stepped into the conference room at 1:58. Rows of chairs faced a podium with the company logo printed behind it. Daniel Reeves stood near the front, speaking quietly with a communications director. He looked exactly as he always had. Polished, composed, immaculate navy suit, silver tie. When his gaze lifted and landed on Adrian, surprise flickered for less than a second before smoothing into something professional. Then his eyes shifted to me. That flicker returned, sharper this time. The room settled as cameras turned on. At exactly 2 o'clock, Daniel stepped to the podium. Thank you all for coming, he began, his tone steady and confident. Today marks a strategic evolution in our healthcare partnerships and internal leadership structure. He spoke about transparency, about integrity, about forward momentum. Each word sounded rehearsed, measured to land cleanly. I felt my pulse in my throat. Adrian stood beside me, hands relaxed at his sides, listening without interruption. Daniel continued, outlining initiatives and thanking stakeholders. Not once did he glance at us again, until the final question. A reporter in the front row raised her hand. Mr. Reeves, there have been rumors about internal disagreements following Mrs. Margaret Cole's passing. Would you care to comment? The room shifted. Daniel's smile remained intact. Margaret Cole's passing was a profound personal loss to this organization, he said smoothly. Any suggestion of impropriety is unfounded. Adrian moved then, not abruptly, not aggressively. He stepped forward just enough for every camera in the room to register his presence beside the podium. Silence fell. Unfounded, Adrian repeated quietly. Daniel's composure tightened at the edges. Adrian turned slightly toward the journalists. Would you define unfounded as lacking evidence, he asked evenly, or lacking someone willing to present it? My heart pounded. The flash drive felt heavier in my hand. Every lens in the room shifted toward us. Daniel's jaw set, just slightly. The air between the three of us felt electric. Adrian glanced at me once. The signal. I stepped forward, my voice steady despite the noise in my chest. I would like to present the pharmacy override logs from 1:52 a.m. the night Margaret Cole passed, I said clearly. The room erupted in murmurs. Daniel did not move. But for the first time, the confidence in his eyes faltered. And in that single crack, I saw what he had underestimated. He thought silence would protect him. He did not account for the moment it would finally break. The silence after my words felt heavier than any accusation. For a split second, no one moved. The cameras kept recording, red lights steady, but the room itself seemed to hold its breath. Daniel Reeves's hand tightened slightly on the edge of the podium. It was subtle. Most people would not have noticed. I did. Adrian did. Pharmacy override logs. One reporter repeated, her voice cutting through the murmurs. Are you alleging misconduct? Daniel's expression shifted into something almost sympathetic. I am not aware of what this nurse believes she has, he said smoothly. But internal medical documentation can often be misunderstood by individuals without administrative oversight. The dismissal was deliberate, controlled, meant to shrink me. I felt the old instinct rise in my chest, the one that told me to step back, to let someone more powerful speak. Then I remembered the clock on the hospital wall. 1:52 in the morning. The override. The whisper. Do not trust. I was the attending nurse that night, I said clearly, projecting my voice across the room. I logged the original dosage at 1:47 a.m. At 1:52 a.m., the medication batch number was changed under your authorization code. The room erupted again, louder this time. Journalists leaned forward. Phones lifted higher. Daniel did not look at me. He looked at Adrian. Is this your strategy? He asked, calm but sharper now. Public theatrics? Adrian stepped closer to the podium, not blocking Daniel, not interrupting him, simply occupying equal space. It is called documentation, Adrian replied evenly. If you would prefer a private review, we can arrange that as well. The undertone was unmistakable. This was not a performance. This was exposure. Daniel's jaw flexed once. Batch numbers are often adjusted for supply chain reasons, he said. That does not imply intent. I reached into my bag and removed a printed copy of the log, the timestamp circled in ink. My hand did not shake as I handed it to the nearest reporter. Then perhaps you can explain why the override occurred 5 minutes after you cleared the room, I said. Gasps moved through the audience like a ripple. Daniel's composure tightened further. You are overstepping, he said quietly, low enough that only those near the podium could hear. Adrian's voice remained calm. No, she is clarifying. A reporter in the second row stood. Mr. Reeves, did you personally authorize a medication change on Margaret Cole at 1:52 a.m.? Cameras zoomed in. The question hung there, simple and direct. Daniel adjusted his tie, buying time. I do not recall the specific timestamp, he said carefully. However, any actions taken that night were within legal and medical guidelines. The answer was polished. It was also incomplete. I felt something shift inside me, not fear this time, but certainty. Then you will not object to an independent audit, I said. The room quieted again. That word carried weight. Audit meant outside eyes. Audit meant paper trails. Adrian's presence beside me felt steady, unwavering. Daniel finally looked at me directly. For the first time, the confidence in his gaze had cracks. Not dramatic, not explosive, but visible. Be careful what you imply, he said softly. Adrian responded before I could. Be careful what you authorized, he replied. The reporters began speaking over one another, questions firing rapidly. Integrity, transparency, investigation. The narrative Daniel had prepared was dissolving in real time. And standing there beneath the bright white lights, I realized something important. He had built his position on silence, on the assumption that no one would challenge him publicly. But silence had weight. And once it tipped, it did not fall quietly. As the room surged with voices and flashing cameras, Daniel Reeves no longer looked like a man in control of the story. He looked like a man calculating the cost of it. The noise did not fade when the press conference ended. It followed us out of the building in the form of flashing cameras and shouted questions that echoed off the glass facade. Adrian did not answer them. He placed a steady hand at the small of my back, guiding me forward without urgency, without hesitation. The gesture was controlled, protective, not possessive. It grounded me. By the time we reached the black SUV, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Notifications stacked across the screen. News alerts. Social media mentions. The story was already moving faster than I could process. "Get in," Adrian said quietly. The door closed, sealing out the chaos. Inside the car, the silence felt almost sacred. I exhaled slowly, realizing I had been holding my breath since I stepped away from that podium. "He is going to deny everything," I said. Adrian's gaze remained forward. "Of course he is. Denial is his first defense. Influence will be his second." I looked down at my phone again. A headline was already circulating. Executive faces questions over late-night authorization. They did not call it wrongdoing. Not yet. But the word authorization was there. Timestamp included. My name appeared in smaller print beneath it. Whistleblower nurse. The word made my chest tighten. "They are calling me a whistleblower," I murmured. Adrian turned his head slightly. "You prefer witness?" he asked. I considered that. Witness implies someone saw something, I said. Whistleblower implies someone chose to speak. Adrian nodded once. Both are accurate. The car moved through traffic, steady and unhurried. My mind replayed Daniel's expression when the audit was mentioned, the small fracture in his composure. He looked surprised, I said. Not shocked, but unprepared. Adrian's voice lowered. He expected loyalty. He did not expect exposure. My phone rang again. This time it was a colleague from the hospital. I hesitated, then answered. Claire, she whispered urgently. There are investigators here. They are reviewing pharmacy logs. Administration looks terrified. I closed my eyes for a moment. Are they asking about me? Yes, she admitted. But not the way you think. They are asking why your override report was never escalated. I felt my pulse steady instead of spike. Because it was suppressed, I said quietly. Claire, she added softly. People are starting to talk. When the call ended, I stared out the window at the city moving past in streaks of afternoon light. 6 months ago, I had been just another nurse on a night shift. Invisible. Replaceable. Today, I had stepped into a room full of cameras and said a name out loud. Adrian's phone vibrated on the seat beside him. He glanced at the screen, then at me. The board has scheduled an emergency session, he said. Daniel Reeves has been asked to step down pending review. The words landed slowly, like stones dropped into water. Not dramatic, not explosive, but irreversible. I swallowed. This is not over, I said. Adrian's gaze met mine, calm and certain. No, he agreed. It is not. Outside, the sun broke fully through the clouds, light flashing across the windshield. I pressed my hand against the cool glass, watching the city reflect back at me. The guilt that had once felt suffocating now felt distant, replaced by something steadier. I had spoken. I had not been silenced. And for the first time since that night at 2:17 in the morning, the truth was no longer a whisper. It was a headline. Power does not collapse in a single afternoon. It shifts quietly, behind closed doors, in conference rooms where voices stay low and decisions become permanent. By early evening, Adrian's townhouse felt less like a sanctuary and more like a command center. Phones rang in other rooms. Footsteps moved with purpose. The television now displayed analysts debating ethics, governance, and corporate responsibility. Daniel Reeves's photograph filled the screen, his confident smile frozen beneath the headline interim suspension pending investigation. I stood near the window, watching the sky fade into deep blue, the city lights blinking on one by one. The board acted faster than I expected, I said. Adrian stood a few feet away, jacket off, sleeves rolled once at the wrist. They acted because the cameras were present, he replied. Reputation moves faster than loyalty. His words were calm, but I could feel the undercurrent beneath them. This was not only about a board decision. It was about trust fractured at the highest level. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from the hospital director. Effective immediately, you are placed on administrative leave pending review. The sentence looked formal, sterile. I read it twice, letting it settle. They suspended me, I said quietly. Adrian did not look surprised. They are protecting themselves, he said. It is a temporary maneuver. I turned toward him. Temporary does not pay rent. The corner of his mouth shifted slightly, not amusement, not dismissal. Consideration. You will not be handling rent alone, he said. The statement was simple, direct. I hesitated. I did not do this for compensation. I know, he replied. That is precisely why you will not be punished for it. Silence settled between us, not uncomfortable, but heavier than before. I thought about the hospital corridors, the nurses who had avoided my gaze months ago, the quiet compliance that kept everything running smoothly. I had been part of that system. A cog. Reliable. Invisible. Now my name was attached to an investigation that could unravel an executive's career. Do you regret it? Adrian asked suddenly. I met his eyes. No, I said without hesitation. I regret waiting 6 months. He nodded once, as if that confirmed something for him. A knock sounded lightly at the door. One of his advisors stepped in, speaking low but urgent. Daniel's legal team has issued a statement. They claim the override was a clerical correction requested by medical staff. My stomach tightened. He is redirecting it back to the hospital, I said. Adrian's expression hardened, not with anger, but with clarity. Then the audit must be public, he said. Full transparency. No internal review. The advisor nodded and left. I felt the weight of what was coming next. Investigations meant testimony. Testimony meant reliving that night in detail. He is not going to disappear quietly, I said. Adrian stepped closer, close enough that I could see the faint tension in his jaw. No, he agreed. But neither are we. Outside, sirens wailed somewhere in the distance, fading as quickly as they came. The city did not pause for corporate upheaval or personal reckoning. It simply moved forward. I pressed my palm against the cool glass again, watching my reflection overlay the skyline. 6 months ago, I thought silence was safer. Today, silence would have cost more than speaking ever could. Adrian's voice softened slightly. My mother believed truth had weight, he said. She used to say it may bend under pressure, but it does not break. I turned toward him. Then we hold it steady, I replied. He gave a single, decisive nod. And in that quiet exchange, I realized this was no longer only about exposure. It was about rebuilding what had been shaken. Trust. Legacy. The future he thought he understood before 1:52 in the morning rewrote everything. And now, neither of us was stepping back. The night before the audit announcement felt quieter than the chaos that came before it. Not peaceful, just focused. By 8 in the evening, the townhouse lights were dimmed except for the study where Adrian and I sat across from each other at a long wooden table. Documents were spread between us. Printed logs. Email timestamps. Internal memos that had begun to surface once Daniel's suspension became public. When power shifts, people start remembering what they once ignored. 3 additional overrides in the past year, Adrian said, sliding a page toward me. Different patients. Same authorization code. My stomach tightened. Were any of them questioned? I asked. No formal complaints, he replied. But patterns rarely begin with a single event. The implications settled heavily. Margaret Cole may not have been the only one. I traced my finger lightly over the page, noting the times. All late night. All within narrow windows. He chose moments when oversight was minimal. I murmured. Adrian leaned back slightly, studying me rather than the papers. You notice details most people miss, he said. It was not praise. It was recognition. I felt heat rise faintly in my chest. Not embarrassment, but something steadier. It is my job to notice, I replied. It always has been. A soft knock interrupted us. Adrian's advisor entered, holding a tablet. The independent audit firm has agreed to conduct a full review. Public statement goes live in 20 minutes. Adrian nodded once. Ensure it includes unrestricted access to pharmacy archives. The advisor inclined his head and left. I exhaled slowly. This is going to get bigger, I said. Adrian's gaze remained calm. It already has. He stood and walked toward the bookshelf along the far wall. From the top shelf, he removed a thin leather journal. Worn edges. Careful stitching. He placed it on the table in front of me. My mother kept notes, he said quietly. About meetings. About conversations that unsettled her. I opened it gently. The handwriting was elegant but firm. Dates. Names. Observations. Several entries referenced tension with Daniel over operational transparency. One line stood out. If trust must be managed, it is not trust at all. My throat tightened. She knew. I whispered. Adrian did not respond immediately. When he did, his voice carried less steel than usual. She suspected. But suspicion without proof becomes rumor. I looked up at him. Now there is proof. The weight of that truth felt different tonight. Not sharp, not frantic, grounded. My phone vibrated softly with a news alert. Independent audit initiated following executive suspension. I let the words sink in. This was no longer a private confrontation or a single press conference moment. It was a formal reckoning. Are you prepared for what they might uncover? I asked quietly. Adrian held my gaze without flinching. I am prepared to know, he said. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the dark sky, distant but constant. I closed the journal carefully and slid it back toward him. She wanted transparency, I said, even if it cost her. Adrian's expression softened just enough to reveal something beneath the authority. Grief. Not loud, not visible to the world, but present. Then we honor. That, he said. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the exhaustion of the past 24 hours finally settle into my bones. Yet beneath it was something steadier than adrenaline. Purpose. 6 months ago, I carried regret alone. Tonight, I sat at a table where the truth had allies. The audit would begin. The headlines would continue. Daniel would respond. But whatever unfolded next, it would not happen in silence. And for the first time since 1:52 in the morning rewrote everything, the future did not feel like something to fear. It felt like something to face. 3 weeks later, the air felt different. Not lighter, clearer. The independent audit report was no longer a headline preview. It was a published document. 58 pages of findings, timestamps, internal communications, and procedural deviations that could not be explained as clerical error. Daniel Reeves had resigned the morning the report went live. Not dramatically, not publicly. A brief statement citing personal reasons and a desire not to distract from the company's future. The board accepted it within the hour. I stood once again in front of Margaret Cole's headstone. The early morning sky painted pale gold instead of gray. The grass was dry this time. The air cool, but not sharp. Adrian stood a few feet away, hands in the pockets of his dark overcoat, silent as he had been the first morning I knelt here. They confirmed the override, I said softly. And the other cases. Adrian nodded once. There will be formal consequences, he replied. Legal reviews. Regulatory action. He did not sound triumphant. He sounded resolved. I placed fresh white lilies at the base of the stone, smoothing the ribbon with steady fingers. I keep replaying that night, I admitted, wondering if I could have done more. Adrian stepped closer, not interrupting, not correcting, simply standing beside me. You could have shouted, he said quietly. You could have filed a complaint and been dismissed before anyone listened. I looked up at him, and instead I waited. You gathered courage, he corrected. His eyes held mine with a steadiness that felt different now, less guarded. Courage does not always arrive at the moment we want it. Sometimes it builds quietly. The wind moved through the trees, leaves whispering overhead. I turned back toward the headstone. She tried to warn me. I said, those 2 words. Do. Not trust. Adrian exhaled slowly. She trusted you enough to say them, he replied. That thought settled into my chest in a way guilt never had. Trust. Not regret. Not failure. Trust. My phone buzzed lightly in my coat pocket. A message from the hospital director. Your administrative leave has been lifted. We would like to discuss your return under revised oversight protocols. I stared at the words for a long second. They want me back, I said. Adrian studied my expression. Do you want to return? He asked. The question felt larger than employment. It felt like identity. I thought about the night shifts, the quiet hallways, the patients who needed someone to notice details. Yes, I said finally. But not the same way. Adrian nodded. Then it will not be the same. We stood there in silence for a few more seconds, not awkward, not uncertain, just aware. The past month had rewritten more than headlines. It had rewritten roles. I was no longer the nurse who stayed silent at 1:52 in the morning, and he was no longer the executive who trusted without question. As we turned to leave, Adrian paused briefly, his gaze resting on his mother's name carved in stone. Truth bends, he said softly, almost to himself. But it does not break. I walked beside him toward the cemetery gates, the sunlight warming my face. I had come here once to apologize. I was leaving now without that weight. Not because the past had changed, but because I had. And this time, I was not whispering into silence. I was walking forward with it.